Today we're tackling a topic that's been quietly at work behind the scenes for decades, but is now making headlines across industries today. Artificial intelligence, or AI. From the moment you wake up and check your phone, to managing your finances, or even correcting a typo in your emails, AI has been subtly transforming our daily lives in ways we often don't realize. Take banking, for example. AI has been assisting in fraud detection for years, analyzing thousands of data points faster than the human could. It's there when your bank sends you an alert about a suspicious charge, or when a loan approval happens in seconds instead of weeks. And it's not just banking. Every time we use tools like spell check or predictive text, AI is in the background, helping us communicate faster and more efficiently.
Have you ever wondered how your phone can recognize your face to unlock itself? Or how your favorite music app suggests new songs you might like? Well, these are all thanks to artificial intelligence is an enhanced technology that enables computers and machines to think and learn like humans. It's like having a brain inside a computer. One of the most common ways we interact with AI is through virtual assistants like Siri, Alexa, or Google Assistant. These helpful companions can answer questions, set reminders, play music, and even control our smart home devices. They make our lives easier.
But here's the question that sparked today's discussion. As AI becomes more advanced and ingrained in our lives, what happens to the human element? While it can streamline processes, organize vast amounts of data, and save us precious time, can AI truly innovate or connect with us on an emotional level? Can it replace the creativity, empathy, and intuition that makes us, well, really human? Welcome to the Big Business Insights podcast, brought to you by Old Mutual. I'm your host, Blessing Utete, the Managing Executive at Old Mutual Corporate Consultants. By meeting thought leaders and visionaries across sectors, looking at the past, the present, and the future, we aim to give business leaders the 360-degree advantage. I'm joined by two brilliant guests, Antonia Bothner, Capital Markets Lead at Endeavour SA. How are you, Antonia?
I'm good, thanks, Blessing.
And we're also joined by Samad Masood, Associate Vice President at Infosys Knowledge Institute UK. Welcome, Samad.
Hi, thanks, Blessing. Thank you very much.
It's really great to have both of you here, and really together we're going to dig into AI's role in today's world and how we can harness this powerful technology without losing the magic of human connection. So let's get into it. And I think maybe just as a start, we know that AI has really transformed several industries. Samad, in your experience, how much of this transformation has improved efficiencies and how much has actually enhanced human creativity and connection?
On one level, that's quite a difficult question to answer. In terms of how much human creativity it's enhanced and such, measuring that is very, very difficult. But in terms of business value, we have actually done quite a bit of work at looking at where AI has been applied by businesses and what sort of value they're getting back from it. Almost exactly a year ago, the sort of second half, last quarter, in fact, of 2023, my organization had a series of surveys of large companies looking at how they use generative AI in particular. That would have been about a year or two after ChatGPT launched. We found that while many, many businesses were deploying and interested and exploring and experimenting, typically it was only about 10% of AI deployments were actually generating a return on business value, or at least in generative AI terms. Since then, things have advanced a lot. And I think it really depends on what area you're focused on. For instance, in marketing, there's a lot of AI that has been used for a while, because there's a lot of transactional data that can be analyzed, a lot of personalization data that can be analyzed, and the uptake and value that comes from that is much higher. Whereas in certain industries or certain functions, it will be lower. But I think it's worth understanding that with any technology, the hit rate is sometimes not always as high as people assume, because even if the technology itself works, what's really, really important is how it's embedded in the organization, how it's embedded in the staff, employees, users, the humans. And that's why that interface is so important. And it's not just to do with AI. For many decades, there's been evidence that often technology implementations in large businesses don't return the value that was expected because the processes don't change around them, or the people aren't helped to change their roles, their use of it. And the easiest way to think of it is you get a new technology implemented that's supposed to improve things by 30% or whatever, but you basically use it as if your job doesn't change. You just do the same thing. So it takes the same amount of time. You just have a nice, shiny, expensive box to help you with it. But effectively, nothing's really changing. So I think that's the way to look at it. A bit of a roundabout answer, but it's not as straightforward as some people think.
Yeah, no, very, very interesting. Antonio, and what has been your experience in this field?
Yeah, I think it's an echo of that kind of. I actually listened to a great podcast, a tech podcast, which talked about AI being in this quite awkward stage of being a tween, in that they had all this potential, but actually a slight overconfidence in actually what it was actually producing. And of course, recently there have been massive leaps in terms of AI, particularly with the large language models. I think massive improvement in areas of efficiency. I know myself, we use it just to generate a kind of a newsletter. So I think certainly efficiency, there are many examples where you could point to that it's transformed and improved efficiency. I think we're yet to see these other areas, and particularly the more human areas, in terms of, well, can it enhance human creativity and connection? And of course, any tech is a tool, and it's limited by the human that is using the tech. So I think we're at early stages to see how we can quantify that. Masses of money have gone into this sector, particularly by the big names, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and it's impacting huge industries like the the chips, NVIDIA. So the question is kind of in its infancy. And, I think these questions were probably asked from many technologies that came about. Finance, in essence, is a massive technology that was kind of an invention in civilization and actually not that far back. In fact, we were probably using numbers first and then developed language, even books. So I think with all of these things, my experience, we're in an early stage of looking at the transformation, but it's huge, the application and the potential.
Both of you are talking about the adaptability and maybe touching on the cultural practices of adoption, because, yes, you can have, as Samad said, that shiny box and it doesn't make use of it. I mean, we've just deployed Copilot as a pilot, and it's variations of usage. Some people just carry on as they've been doing, and other people are starting to use it. And so, really AI has the ability to organize vast amounts of information and streamline processes. However, does it really have the capability to innovate? Is innovation still a uniquely human trait? What are your thoughts on that one, Antonia?
I work with entrepreneurs, and so even though they're in the tech space, and I still believe that innovation is a hugely human quality. It's, the root of, often comes about during some kind of a hardship or suffering. In fact, necessity is the mother of all invention. So I think it's the innovation part. It depends what you qualify that, but this human potential to imagine, which is essentially what it ends up boiling down to, is this part of being human that you can't imagine because it's not there. I'm not sure that AI can do that. It might sort of rehash, but what is essentially original? Where does that come from? And that is what creativity is. Even the word artificial, actually, I looked at the etymology. It actually comes from the word art and being created by human. So at some point, there is an element of that human consciousness, that human imagination, that is what allows for that originality. I'm not too sure that you can qualify AI as being innovative in a human sense, but it might actually end up boiling down to semantics.
Samad, maybe over to you. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen in integrating AI into human-centric businesses, particularly when it comes to maintaining empathy and meaningful customer interactions? And I know for us as Old Mutual, this is significant because we are in that space where we advise people on financial outcomes, and a lot of that has to do with the psychology and the emotions that go with money. So thinking around those thoughts, what are some of the things you're seeing in the integration there?
I'm going to answer this like I do with lots of things, in that it really all depends. And I think it depends on what we mean by human centricity. Because certainly all businesses require humans and are human centric in one way. But whether your business model depends on human centricity is another thing. If the customer is expecting a human response, you're expecting to be served at a restaurant by a human, you're expecting to speak to a human psychologist, perhaps. There are certain things where people expect and want to have human interaction, and that's part of the value because it's based on real relationships. And I think there, in that case, when we think about how AI interacts with humans, I think something that is often not talked enough about is there is a creepiness factor, right? There is a creepiness factor that people feel when they're dealing with AI. And I think we have to accept that. And there's a trust issue and there's a concerns, from many people working in organizations and in the consumer world that are worried about the future of AI. And while people want to experiment with it, I think we have to be honest with ourselves. A lot of us are quite scared about it. And I think those elements have to be taken into account to understand how can you build trust? How can you use AI to enhance human capability? And that you, in fact, can become perhaps more human-centric through the use of AI. And Blessing, you described your own organization. Of course, it's human-centric from your perspective, but I would suggest that from a customer's perspective, they're not expecting a human interaction. What they're expecting is a financial transaction. But perhaps AI can help you also develop that human-centric or that more human ability, or to invest in more sort of human interactions so that the customers also see that as a human relationship they're having with their organization. But I think the key elements are building trust by augmenting humans, enabling the humans in your organization and your customers, your partners, to really have more human relationships, because that's really what people want. And that's what human centricity means. But if you're using the technology to try and just kind of obfuscate or put another barrier between the humans and your customers, then it may work in some cases, but I think you may also struggle with some pushback from customers and employees.
I think that element of the trust element is always going to be the part that really makes the building of relationships forge ahead. I like what you said about its augmentation. So using AI as a support, but you don't actually lose the humanness of these connections. We're going to go into a clip now from a TED talk given by Bina Amanath. It's about the value of human creativity in the AI era. Let's take a listen and then I'll get your thoughts on it.
We are in a period of change. There is intense technological change happening around us. It's complex, it's confusing, it's fast, and things are moving every day, right? The rules and applications of AI are not well defined. But eventually, this change will evolve and settle down where we'll find that new paradigm, a new way of life where humans and AI and machines work together effectively. So, I do think when that happens, human creativity will have way more value.
Maybe let's start with Antonia. What's your first reaction to that comment by Bina?
I absolutely agree with her. And I think that's been shown over time. Initially when we have a new technology, it can feel quite destabilizing. We immediately want to resist against it. And it's like with anything when there's something, a new paradigm. But after a while we don't even realize that we're veering towards cyborg. We're no longer a natural selection. We live twice as long. These are big changes that are happening in our civilization. But it does break down to a norm after a while. And there's a fascinating book by a guy called Ian McGilchrist called The Divided Brain. And it's looking at brain lateralization, looking at the creative versus the logical. And his whole theory about the divided brain is we've become too reliant on the logos, the scientific, the maths. Since the scientific revolution, we start to devalue the creative side, the side that is a lot more spontaneous. And actually, I think you might even see with this, it's called the master and his emissary. And the idea is not to devalue the one over the other, but actually to allow both. And so potentially with this new technology, there's a way for us to start to really value creativity and the irrational aspect rather than the purely rational aspect, the imagination, the mythopoetic versus the purely scientific way. So I think it's quite fascinating. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to really think about what it means to be human and to actually pay attention to the psychology and the deeper layers of our consciousness, which I think is a lovely saying about, art is a tool of knowing who we are and what we want. We need to be reflected, and often it's through this creativity that we get to know ourselves. So yeah, I think this is the positive side of where we think AI is going. Of course, there are always risks and being aware of that, but I think it's very exciting.
I'm going to take a bit of a sort of devil's advocate stance on this one, because what was mentioned, I mean, you could argue that that's something that has been said about every technological wave, and Antonia even referenced that. It has happened before. Let's look at social media. That's a technology no one planned, no one expected. It's a technology that's completely revolutionized the way we work as a society. It created a new value chain of creative people who create memes, who create troll accounts, who create comedy videos, whatever, right? It's boosted creativity. For me, I think sometimes with AI, we're looking ahead at something and talking about something that's going to happen and not realizing the thing that's already happening with us right now. We are already in that era. We're an incredibly communicative and creative era of our lives. And I think it's also worth having some perspective on AI, that since ChatGPT and generative AI launched, all of us now have experience of some form of AI. But I think what we tend to forget is that actually artificial intelligence has been being worked on and has been being deployed in businesses, in governments, in systems for many decades, and has been slowly getting better and better and better. And the generative AI revolution or appearance of it, what it's really doing is just giving lay people like ourselves the opportunity to test and see what can happen, right? It's been a big shift from how, I think it's worth understanding, it's almost a mark of previous to generative AI, you could see AI as predominantly being used to understand the world, to take content in and document it and analyze it and understand it. Whereas with generative AI, it's taking inputs and it's creating stuff. It's creating images. It's creating music. It's creating videos. It's a creative AI. And so I think we need to kind of redefine what we mean by being creative, right? And the creative parts of our brains. I think the fact is being creative and being flexible in our thinking, that is what being human is, right? And from the clip we heard earlier, on one hand, I can't disagree with it, but I can also say it's not that surprising, because that's what we do with every wave of technology. And I think, Antonia, you mentioned that, right? That there's everything that comes, we always develop some sort of new form of creativity. I think the kind of weird thing is that this time around, the traditional types of things that we would consider creative, pictures, moving image, sound, songs, music, poems, are all being created by the AI. So we've now got to find, well, what are the other creative mediums? Which is why I started this answer talking a bit about social media memes and stuff like that. Maybe in 50 years' time, they will be up in the museums and we will be going and looking at who is the Michelangelo of Instagram and this sort of thing.
Samad, so I mean, with what you're saying there, do you then see, I mean, this AI as more of an assistant or a collaborator in the future? I mean, if you think about your analogy now of what will we see in what we think are art museums built by AI, or humans will be featuring in terms of the creativity of artwork? What do you think that's going to look like in the future?
Blessing, I'm going to tell you now, no one's ever considered my views on art as very important, so I probably won't spend too much time trying to determine what the future of art will look like. That's not necessarily my specialization. But I think what's interesting, you mentioned this point about assistant versus collaborator, right? And like, what is the difference between that? And I think that is something we're entering an era. And I think I mentioned earlier in my answer about AI is it's something that's being developed and deployed for decades now, right? And really, it is just a form of mathematics and algorithms that are being deployed and used. And we're just getting better and better, and they're getting more sophisticated. But actually, we could think of this really as just the natural extension of the computing revolution. And you could ask yourself, at what point did computers change from just being assistants to being collaborators? And I think it was quite a while back since we've been using computing power as a collaborator to kind of co-create things with us, and since the 60s, there's been musicians who've been creating digital music and such. So I think it's just an ongoing development that we'll see. Of course, it does raise the question, how do we define being human, in the future? And how do we distinguish perhaps better rather than define between what is a human thing and what is not a human thing, and whether it matters at all? But that is probably too big a question.
Maybe to Antonia, we've touched on this a little bit in terms of the ability of AI to give advice based on data. And I mean, the question there is really, can it ever truly understand human emotions and complexities of relationships, which are sometimes very critical in business?
I think the answer is yes. If you take it at a very basic level, understanding is quite a logos. But if you say truly understand, now that changes. So I think it's important, actually, particularly in finance, we are actually too emotional when we make decisions, which is why having an advisor is great, because you can really just cut through the data. And actually, that's almost why it works so well. We take out that irrationality, but that's also the limitation, because it is that irrationality that makes us human. And that's a big question, a sense of being a sentient being. And sometimes that is important to understand those complexities of relationship. Actually, the ability to actually be Machiavellian, which is a weird trait, but it's a part of being human. That is strategy, that is a motive. That is what comes in. And I think would be too literal from an AI perspective, which in a sense adds that transparency, but it's never going to be that second derivative. So I'm not sure. I mean, because some of those things are absolutely critical in business when you're talking about strategy. So I think that they're different layers in terms of understanding, and certainly in a sales capacity where you really need your emotion, you need those tactics, the strategic. I'm not sure AI would be able to compete on that level, but yeah. On the others, certainly it's fantastic because you can cut through all the noise and the limitation of using the data in healthcare sector, all the large data that can be analyzed in terms of finding solutions to diseases and even in climate change. These are areas that are really quite exciting, but I think we need to differentiate in the different areas of business where it could be useful.
Antonia, if I could just build on what you said, because the emotion part of a decision is so important, right? And we've been for years in business saying we need to make data-led decisions. But still, I think people struggle to make data-led decisions, right? They need to have a narrative to understand the data, or understand why the data comes like that. Because if you spend any time with data, you realize that the answer is very, very rarely obvious in data. The more you look at data, the more gray areas there are, and the more of your discernment you need to use to decide what to do. And there's a point I made earlier about trust. If AI is to do this for us, we need to trust. Why do we trust the colleague telling us we should do this versus a computer telling us that we should do this? It depends on, over time, how the trust we build, but also the narrative they give us. And I think that's where that human element has to come in. I do feel that we generally overestimate the ability for data to make a decision, right? And for AI to make a decision, because ultimately AI is just mathematical formulas, right? And you, as a human, have to design those formulas to decide at what point do they decide this. Is it a blue or red, or is it forward or backwards, or so probably we put a bit too much stead in that, and I do wonder how that will develop over time.
Mark Twain famously said there are three types of lies: damn lies, and statistics. And it's to your point, it's the narrative, and you can look at data and you can build a story around it. It really depends on the lens that you're looking at, and that's why we find in the financial markets, everyone can have all these predictions, and economists are famously known for never actually having the right predictions, because there is always this tail event, this black swan, this irrationality, this exuberance that we're just not able to see. And data doesn't actually get us there because the models just can't model it. And I think Nassim Taleb actually does a lot of work around this with a lot of his work. And that's the element in terms of that unexplained portion. As you say, if you cannot solely rely on a set of data, there has to be that element of bringing, that human element into it. In the master and his emissary, you can't let the emissary overtake the master. It needs to be put in its place. You know that it's actually just a tool. It's not something that's going to be overtaking you.
Yeah, and I think maybe just in terms of with the context you've set, I mean, Antonia and Samad, I mean, AI is going to continue to evolve with the evolution of the quantum leaps that are being forged. And so in that context, what kind of skills do you think future generations need to cultivate to stay relevant in a world that relies on tech for basic decision making? Maybe we can start with you, Samad, and we can go to Antonia.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I used the term discernment earlier, and it's a term I like to think of. I think sometimes people call it critical thinking. I think really, the skills that are important, I suppose, people really need to develop are a kind of critical thinking approach to technological outputs that they're given. That's how we can help technology be better, and that's how we can help complement the technology, because it isn't magic, and it can't do everything, and it won't get everything right. And we need to be there to sort of guide it. It doesn't mean we all have to be computer programmers or mathematicians, but it does mean that we need to be comfortable with and getting more familiar with these things. And, you were saying, Blessing, your organization is using Copilot, and some people use it, some people don't. I think we need to give people the kind of confidence to make a mistake. If you remember when computers first became popular, and when you were first using a computer, and my children don't have this feeling ever, but older computers, you felt that if you typed the wrong thing, it could break the whole computer.
Yeah.
And you were worried that, can I do that? Can I press that button? And now you realize there's very little you can do to actually break the computer, particularly as you just turn it off and on again. And I think we're at that stage with AI. We've got to kind of realize that bad things probably can't happen in our own experimenting with AI, and we need to be a bit braver with it as individuals. That's not the same advice I'd give to a corporate, right? Corporates have responsibilities. AI can go wrong, programs can go wrong, and they need to be very, very careful and responsible about it. But in terms of your question of what do individuals need to do, I think we need to be a bit braver, and we shouldn't sort of think, oh, well, that's just for mathematicians or computer programmers to deal with.
Antonia, your thoughts, and maybe you can also just add in, are there jobs that AI is just going to replace? And what jobs might it create?
Well, of course, alluding to a book by Max Tegmark called Life 3.0, and he shows the map in terms of the sort of destruction of jobs from the routine jobs that AI is going to replace. And thankfully, a lot of us don't want to do this types of roles, that sort of data crunching. And then, he has this landscape and it goes into a hill, and you've got the creative industries in the top. Whether or not that's right is yet to be seen. But I think something that comes up, particularly with the entrepreneurs that we work with, is this layer of software developers and coding. And actually, most technologies would take out these bottom layers, and this one is really hitting the sort of software. AI is so smart, it can end up completely replacing a lot of these software engineers. So, what is it that you need to stay relevant? What do you tell your kids they should be learning? And I think will still go back to the fundamentals of how you make decisions as a human. Yes, they're tools and they can reinforce. You see people with Garmin's and they sort of start telling them about their health, but that is not that's just a reinforcement. Actually, if you're really honest with yourself and how you're feeling in your body, you will actually know that already. So I would say it's really developing those human tools of using the tech to enhance that rather than replacing it, to allow those tools of imagination, which you might not be using, to get stimulated with the tech.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's really more about, continuous learning. growth mindset, continue to be open to these new technologies. I'm going to go to our cornerstone question. Both of you, what do you think we haven't said about this topic today? We start with you, Samad.
What will be the next surprising thing that takes us forward? I've been looking at technology trends for almost 25 years, and every few years it runs in cycles. And so for me, it's sort of what will be the next thing that surprises us.
Thanks, Samad. And Antonia?
I think there are obviously a lot of concerns. There's the dystopian and the utopian version. So maybe this sort of existential risk, ethical development, because you can do it for good and you can do it for bad, because, the internet was developed, you have a dark web, it's just the nature of what's behind it. The governance, how international is this? Or does it become, if you think about world wars, even finance, during the Cold War, it's about finance. It's about moving money around. It wasn't necessarily about, so how is this going to be used in international warfare? So they're all these derivations of you can't actually quite comprehend, but it's, that also boils down to the fact being that, humans have got this dark and light side. So maybe, yes, there's a societal impact in terms of solving climate and health, but there's also an incredibly dark side. And how do we control for that?
Well, thank you very much, Antonia and Samad. This has really been a fascinating conversation on AI and the art of human connection. And I'm sure this conversation will continue. But really, thank you on behalf of our podcast for joining us.
Great to be here.
Thanks a lot, Blessing.
And that wraps up our conversation on AI and the art of human connection. If there's one takeaway from today's episode, it's that while AI has a significant role to play in enhancing efficiency and organizing information, it's the human touch, our creativity, empathy, and ability to think outside the box that keeps businesses thriving. AI may streamline, but it can't replace what makes us unique. 3 reasons why you should consider setting up group assurance for your employees. Life happens, and doing the right thing as an employer is even more important when unexpected life events happen to your employees. Here are 3 ways group risk assurance can help. Firstly, life assurance provides peace of mind to families of breadwinners, knowing their loved ones can be more financially prepared for the loss of income should they pass away unexpectedly. Secondly, critical illness cover can help minimize financial stress related to the high costs of treating a severe illness. And lastly, but not least, disability benefits provide income protection should an employee become disabled and not be able to work, either temporarily or permanently. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences with AI. How is it impacting your work or daily life? Share with us in the comments or sign up for our monthly newsletter to stay in the loop.